The name of the story is The Last Stop. It was just supposed to be a short trip. Sarah had taken the night bus many times before, always enjoying the quiet ride through the dark countryside, the hum of the engine lulling her into a peaceful half-sleep. This time, though, something felt different. From the moment she stepped onto the bus, an uneasy feeling gripped her. The driver didn't look at her when she boarded, and the few passengers scattered in the dimly lit seats sat in unnatural silence, their faces turned away, cloaked in shadow. Sarah found an empty seat near the middle and settled in. As the bus pulled out of the station, the world outside turned into a blur of shadowy trees and moonlit fields. The rhythmic sway of the bus on the lonely road should have been soothing, but instead it gnawed at her nerves. The air felt thick, and she found herself glancing over her shoulder repeatedly, certain someone was watching her. An hour passed. The bus sped through the night, never stopping to let anyone on or off. Sarah found it odd. Normally, the bus made frequent stops in the small towns scattered along the route. She glanced around again, trying to gauge her fellow passengers. They were all so still, too still. A man a few seats ahead wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, but his hand resting on his knee was pale and motionless. A woman in the back corner had her head tilted back as though sleeping, but her mouth was open, unnaturally wide. Sarah's heartbeat quickened. She fumbled for her phone, desperate to check the time or find some distraction, but there was no signal. That wasn't right. There was always reception along this route. She looked out the window, hoping to see a familiar landmark or road sign, but the landscape had changed. The trees were gnarled and twisted, their branches clawing at the bus like skeletal fingers. The road was narrower now, and the sky had taken on an oppressive darkness, not the natural kind, but something thicker, like the world had been swallowed by an endless night. The driver had still not spoken a word. "Excuse me," Sarah finally called out, her voice cracking slightly. No one moved. The driver's rigid back remained hunched over the wheel, eyes locked on the road ahead. Sarah stood up and made her way down the aisle, hoping someone would respond to her. As she passed the man with the hat, she hesitated. She couldn't explain why, but something about him seemed off. Her eyes darted to his hand, and her breath caught in her throat. His skin wasn't just pale, it was cold and gray, like stone. She reached out, trembling, and lightly touched his arm. He didn't move. She leaned closer and gasped. His skin was hard, frozen in place, and beneath the brim of his hat, his eyes were open, glassy, dead. She stumbled backward, bumping into the seat behind her. The woman in the back corner, the one with her head tilted back, was no better. Her face was contorted in a silent scream, her mouth hanging wide open, eyes rolled back into her head. Sarah's stomach twisted. These people weren't just still, they were corpses. Panicking now, Sarah ran to the front of the bus, shouting at the driver, "Stop the bus. Let me off." She banged on the glass partition, but the driver didn't react. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white, his head locked forward. Desperate, she grabbed the wheel herself, jerking it to the side. The bus didn't respond. The wheel felt solid and moving. That's when she noticed the driver's reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and staring straight ahead, but his lips were sewn shut. Thin black stitches crisscrossed his mouth, pulling his skin taut. Blood dried in the corners of his lips. Sarah screamed and stumbled back, retreating down the aisle, her mind racing. What was this place? What had she boarded? Suddenly, the bus slowed. Sarah looked out the window and saw nothing but a thick, black void swirling at the edge of the road like a churning sea of darkness. The bus came to a stop. The door creaked open, and a cold gust of air swept through the bus, carrying with it a faint whisper. Last stop. No one moved. Not the driver, not the corpses, nothing. Sarah's pulse raced as she stood frozen, staring at the open door, the yawning abyss outside beckoning her. She turned to run back to her seat, but her legs felt heavy, like they were sinking into the floor. She glanced down and saw the darkness seeping up through the bus like ink, wrapping around her ankles and pulling her down. She tried to scream, but no sound came. Her mouth opened wide, but her voice was swallowed by the void, just like the others. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the reflection of the driver in the mirror, his eyes now locked onto hers, wide and unblinking, a silent warning. The bus door hissed shut, and the engine rumbled to life once more, and the bus drove on into the night, bound for destinations unknown, never stopping, always collecting new passengers who would never reach their intended destination, because this was the last stop for everyone, forever.